My name is Clare Coss, and I have something to say. I was born white and privileged in a racist world, and I've been dealing with that my whole life.
That's great. My name is Blanche Wiesen Cook, and I have something to say. We need each other. We need community. We have to go door to door, block by block, and build a movement so that we can live in peace and justice. Well, I always say my life is an accident because I started out in life as a gymnast, and all I cared about was sports. And I had an accident. A boy put a barbell at the end of my mat as I came out of a triple flip, and that was the end of my life. I thought I couldn't, be a gymnast. So I had to major in history and political science and anthropology and other things, and one thing led to another. And it was all sort of accidental. I was very lucky in that I had a syndicated column, and out of one column, I wrote about Eisenhower, and the president of Doubleday called me up and said, "Would you like to write a book about Eisenhower?" So I got to write a book called The Declassified Eisenhower, and everything I wanted to research was secret and classified. And so I left Abilene, where the Eisenhower papers were, and I flew back to New York and called a meeting of some of my friends and in the ACLU and the Center for Constitutional Rights. And we created what became the Freedom of Information Act, and really worked very hard to end the plague of secrecy about all things important, like the overthrow of Iran in 1953 and in Guatemala in 1954, which is the essence of my Eisenhower book. Bella Abzug, who was a friend of ours, was in Congress at the time, and she pushed it through. And we have the Freedom of Information Act. I'm very proud of that. My book on Crystal Eastman came out of my dissertation. I did a dissertation on Woodrow Wilson and the peace movement during World War I at Johns Hopkins, and found Crystal Eastman. And and nobody had ever written about her at the time. And she's this amazing woman. Oxford published the collection that I got, in part declassified, and she founded the peace movement, where we met. WILP. It was the American Union Against Militarism, and then the Women's Peace Party, and then that became the Women's Peace Party. Crystal was president of that with Jane Addams in Chicago, and Lillian Wald in New York, and Crystal, and then she founded the ACLU with Roger Baldwin, who was her pal. Came when she was going to have a baby. He came down to take over the office. So I was very lucky.
When I was 7, my mother and I were visiting my grandparents in New Orleans. And my mother and I got on a trolley, and I ran to get a seat by the window and moved the "For Colored Only" sign back so I could get by the window. And my mother came back to me and said, "Claire, all those people can't sit down if you put that shellac plaque there where it is." I said, "Well, I wanted to sit by the window." She said, "But they can't sit down." So I was so embarrassed, and I moved forward. And I couldn't understand how a child could dictate where people sit. It wasn't race that I was thinking. It was like, how does a kid tell an adult where they should sit? So that kind of set me off on being an observer for things that were unjust. So I liked to write about women who go where the silence is. And Lillian Wald, my one-woman play, takes her on a journey because it was the time of the Nicaraguan siege when I was writing the play, so it became an anti-war play. And her efforts to try to keep the U.S. out of World War I and call for a conference of nations to bring peace. So she dedicated her life to that, in addition to the Henry Street settlement, and was responsible for helping to found the ACLU and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which is where Blanche and I met, working against the war in Vietnam at WILP in 1966. And we became co-conspirators ever since then.
So we were at this meeting. You tell the story.
Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And I had just come down from Buffalo, where I had been for a year. And there was this woman sitting across from me in this circle. And she was staring at me.
And it was love at first sight.
It was love at first sight. And I was wearing a blue Liberty of London suit and pumps and stockings. And I had, put a little light coloring in my hair. So it looked a little blonde because I got gray very early. And I thought, what's going on here? Here she was. She had a Dunhill cigarette holder, and she had tinted glasses, and she had a butch haircut, and her high boots. She was in a skirt, too. We always were in skirts then. And I thought, oh, my gosh. So that after the meeting, I ran away because I thought, oh my, what is this? And
I went around to everybody in the room asking who that woman was, and found the woman who brought her.
Right.
And then
Kurticek. And so Blanche called the woman who had taken me to the meeting and said, I'd like to have a meeting on keeping the libraries open for working people, because they were going to close it on weekends and evenings. And we need a demonstration out in front of the New York Public Library to keep the hours open. And she said, can you invite Claire, the woman that you brought to the meeting? And so I went to the meeting at Kurticek's, I can't think of her nursing name right now, home, which was right near where I lived. And there was only one person there. And Blanche had arranged this. So after the meeting, she walked me home, which was 92nd and Madison, and she was at 92nd and Riverside Drive, completely across the park as the crow flies. And that was the beginning. We started to
double date.
We double dated with our husbands, and we got to know each other. We did all kinds of political action together, like community control of schools. It was a very heady time. It was the 60s, so we were like peace meetings, peace demonstrations, and we got to know each other very well. And then at some point, we decided to leave our husbands.
In London,
on a bench in Russell Square.
Russell Square Park.
And here we are, 56 years later. Because I was straight. She had been in the life for a long time, even though she was married. You know how that goes.
Well, we were all married in those days with Audre Lorde, and we had a gang. I always say never go anywhere without your gang. So about a year.
Oh, no.
More than a year.
It was more than a year. It was, I'll tell you when it was 3 years.
69.
Yeah.
And then
the time of Stonewall. The month of Stonewall is our anniversary on the full moon, because we don't know when, but sometime during that month we knew we were going to leave our husbands for each other. So we made our anniversary the full moon in June 1969.
Right.
56.
56 years.
Went by very fast.
Congratulations. It's beautiful to see.
Yeah.
Pretty
Very
good.
lucky. Yes, we're very lucky. Yes.
Well, I had an unusual experience when I went to Stony Brook to get my social work MSW degree. The School of Social Work had just decided to have an affirmative action program, and that was in the early 70s. And one of the professors said, why don't we have that for gay people too, affirmative action? And so they wanted 2 lesbians and 2 gay men to be admitted to the program, the MSW program, as gay people, rather. We didn't have LGBT language back then. So it was gay and lesbian. And so I was one of the 2 lesbians. And here I am, white, and, who would imagine that I would be the recipient of an affirmative action quota? And so it was wonderful because I got to, I was very bold and I didn't have any problem about being gay. So I had a teaching fellow, and I would always come out in my classes very early in the semester. And this was very, this wasn't done back then. So it was, and then the students would come up to me after class, and, the gay students, and would thank me so much for being out and blah, blah, blah. So it was an unusual and wonderful experience.
Well, I had a similar experience teaching at John Jay. Over the years, John Jay started out as exclusively police officers and firefighters, and then we had open enrollment. And I think, we really have lived through the changing of the world in a very positive way, so that not only was it okay to wear pants to class, but, we were going to integrate everything. And we did. So I'm very grateful to the faculty as we grew and changed. And I spent 55 years at John Jay and the Graduate Center later. And it's really been wonderful. And we've helped to change that part of the world.
Yes.
We really did.
We did what we...
Yeah. And Audrey was at Hunter and the Graduate Center, and we really worked together. She was just one of our best friends. Audrey and I were at Hunter together in the 50s, and remained close ever since. And, we just grew and changed. And our lives.
We were family.
We were family.
With Audrey and Frances, her partner, and the 2 children, Beth and Jonathan. And it was a very heady time.
It was really great.
I remember in the 70s, we were so hopeful that the SALT I and SALT II and disarmament, and it really looked like we were going to fulfill the dream of a democracy that would care about disarmament and protecting the world from these terrible weapons.
Right.
And
from fallout.
When Reagan got elected, it sort of took this other turn that's culminated in what we have facing us today. But I have to tell you, living with Blanche for the 36 years it took her to write the 30 volumes, like 10 years of volume, was really an incredible experience for me, because we went to all the places that Eleanor had gone to, and we just met so many wonderful people all over the country who care about justice and equality, and she's such an inspiration, and Blanche became that kind of inspiration, talking to everywhere, and she just spoke peace action, and everybody in the audience was just so filled with, possibility after hearing you speak. So I'm a lucky.
And I'm lucky because Claire's, your theater, your opera, your words galvanize incredible audiences.
It's true.
Yes. Yeah, I think Crystal Eastman was first. And then I did this Garland Library of War and Peace. I was part of one of the founders of what now is the Peace History Society. And we had the Garland printed 360 volumes of books that disappeared on war and peace. That it's a fabulous collection.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Eleanor Roosevelt was also an accident. I went up to the Roosevelt Library with Joe Lash, who, I had reviewed a book. Oh, the Hick book, right?
Yeah.
I reviewed a book, very mean, stupid book about Eleanor Roosevelt and her friend and lover, Lorena Hickok. And so I gave it a very mean review. And everybody started saying, why don't you write about Eleanor Roosevelt? And I called Joe Lash, who was a friend, because he had blurbed my Crystal Eastman book, saying, this is a book that should stay in print forever, and you get to be friends with people who blurb your books that way. And I said, why didn't you write about Hick? What's going on? And he said that he hated her, and she hated him. He said, but you should do it. And he took me up to the Roosevelt Library. And at the time, I said, don't be ridiculous. I'm a military historian. I do hard history. Goddess forgive me. And because I was teaching at John Jay and also at West Point, and military history really was what I was then, peace and military history. Because I felt peace history had to be part of military history, so we did that. And but when he took me up to the Roosevelt Library, I realized there was so much more to write about. That, he had done the Good Son book, and it was wonderful in many ways, but there was much more to do. And I thought I could finish it by her centennial in 1984. And as you know, I didn't finish it until 2016. So we've been living with her for a long time.
I call her the other woman.
Well, once I went into her papers, I discovered this amazing person who wanted to make the world a better place, the entire world, and saw the world as a united family. All the people on the planet are her people. And everywhere she went, she had only one question. Tell me, what do you want? What do you need? And the goal was to make the world a place of peace and brotherhood, sisterhood, fraternity, sorority, with everybody having good work to do, education, and security. That was her vision. And she never stopped growing and changing. She has My Day column is a daily column, so she's the first woman of journalism. Then she becomes the first lady of radio and then television. She was truly, truly amazing. And it was a captivating reality to discover her and her friends. Her best friend and mentor was a woman named Esther Lape, L-A-P-E, and there's still not a book on Esther Lape, which is amazing because she wanted to have health care as part of the Social Security Act of 1935. And it was in the original legislation, and the AMA lobbied it to death, and she fought for health care for all, which would be single payer, to the end of her life in the 1980s. She was amazing. And with her, Eleanor Roosevelt really became the kind of activist that she became. They've championed the World Court in the 1920s. And now I'm thinking about Eleanor Roosevelt's FBI file, which I got through the Freedom of Information Act. And it's really an astonishing file. But the first thing in her file is their campaign to get the U.S. into the World Court. And then Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, fights for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
But for that, it was un-American.
Yes,
the World
Court was un-American.
Was seen by the authorities as being un-American. I thought that was incredible. And then go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's incredible. It really is. Yes, well, the Red Scare and the deportation of people and the Japanese Removal Act, all of that. Eleanor Roosevelt was a persistent warrior for civil rights and human rights. And she visited people who were put into camps. She visited the Japanese removal camps. She spoke to people who were under threat all through her life. She protested, she wrote columns and did radio programs protesting. And she became, a great human rights activist. And the United States has still, to the best of my knowledge, not ratified the Economic and Social Rights Covenant of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's covenants in two parts, civil and political rights. We did ratify under Jimmy Carter, and then, was it George Herbert Walker Bush? Yes, Carter signed it, George Herbert Walker Bush got it ratified, but nobody has brought up the economic and social rights. So, what she introduced are things we have to fight for. And of course now, in this moment of fascism and tyranny, we have to fight again for everything. Things that we have assumed were sacred and constitutional, because they were sacred and constitutional until this moment.
So I had a divided career, and I worked as a psychotherapist for about 30 years. And then I would do my writing, because I didn't take on a huge clientele. I kept it enough so that I could balance the two careers. And I loved being a psychotherapist. It was wonderful work, helping people to have a free mind so they could be who they authentically wanted to be. Well, my mother moved to New Orleans, back to New Orleans from New Jersey when my father died when I was a junior. And I was going to a Quaker boarding school on Long Island, Friends Academy. And she let me stay for my senior year up north. And she said, but you got to go to college in Louisiana. I'm not going to let you go anywhere else. So Newcomb wouldn't let me live in the dorm because my mother was a resident. And so I went 86 miles upriver to Baton Rouge and was immersed in a very segregated environment there, as you can imagine. And Jim Crow was at its height. So when Emmett Till was murdered and tortured and that horrible tragedy happened, nobody on the LSU campus wanted to talk about it. I couldn't find any allies because I was a Yankee, as they called me. And it just hit me so deep and deep in my heart that this young boy was tortured and killed right upriver, not far from where I was. And I resolved to dedicate my life to justice. That's how I got to it. And then when I had some kind of epiphany that I woke up one morning at dawn and I said, I'm going to write about Emmett Till. I don't know where it came from, but I guess I had been carrying that, haunted by that all those years. And it was very important for me to write the libretto for the opera and a play also.
First you wrote the play.
Yeah, first I wrote the play. And Mary Watkins, a wonderful composer, her music is incredible, set it to music. Well, she's in Oakland, and I'm here. So we had a long distance, and she would write, I would have the text, and she would put it to music, and she would send that to me, and I would listen to it, and we were so in tune with each other. It was amazing. She always understood in her music what I intended. It was so beautiful, this process. And she had been 16 years old when Emmett Till died. She lived in Colorado. And so she had this very deep connection also to his death and what happened.
She's African American.
Yes, and she's African American, and has written an opera on Fannie Lou Hamer since then, and Clara Barton. So it was a really very special experience to work with somebody who was so deeply moved the same way that I was.
Well, I've always considered myself the most lucky person in the world to have as my first reader, not just a dramatist, but a therapist who, I'm writing about complicated people, and Claire is my first editor and my first reader. So I am very lucky.
I am too. I was very privileged to be your first reader.
Yeah.
And we trusted each other. We showed each other our writing before it went out to anybody else. And she would read my plays, and I would read her chapters, and it was a wonderful process.
It's a real team effort. I couldn't have written what I've written without Claire.
And I wouldn't have been drawn to some of the subjects that I've been drawn to without you.
I have 3 rules for my writing students, and I think these 3 rules are for everybody. Unpack your heart, be bold, and enjoy the process.
And we like to say, hearts open, fists high.
Shoulder to shoulder, into the future. Hearts open, fists high. Yes.
Right.